Perfect. Let's take a deep breath. So welcome, YouTube family. We're in a new spot today. We're at Earth Spirit Lodge. This is not going to be our main area yet, main location, but we're still working on getting drapes over here because the light of God is very blinding if we sit over there right now. So we're kind of in this cute little nook. And we're recording with my new phone, so hopefully the video and the sound quality is decent. Please let me know in the comments down below if it's not. Okay, let's take a deep breath before we jump into today's topic. So today's topic, we're going to be talking about, well, the main mission today is to get all of y'all to not complain for 7 days. And it's really beautiful because it's almost our holiday, we're just upon Yule and Christmas is around the corner, and a lot of different cultures around the world and religions have time to celebrate. New Year's is coming up. And so anytime you have a lot of people congregating together, and there's a lot of pressure with traveling and vacations going on, purchasing gifts, preparing feasts, there's a lot of stress, isn't there? And sometimes too, there's uncertainties with it, especially when people move or, different family members, things change, transitions. And so there's a lot of pressure during this time of year. And I think it's a perfect time to have this topic of 7 days, no complaints. And we're going to talk a little bit about, I haven't talked about this all year, but we're going to go into the law of attraction a bit today. Abraham Hicks, Esther Hicks teachings, and we're actually tying it to the first 3 tenets of living peace, which is pretty cool. So let's breathe that in. And so just a short synopsis, law of attraction. It's this idea, I find it as a universal truth. It definitely has always seemed accurate and consistent in my life. And a lot of people I've worked with. There are people out there that do view it more as a belief system, so I'm gonna just, whatever resonates with you, that's okay. But it's the idea that like energy attracts like energy. What you put out to the world, you receive back. And what's cool is almost all the religions have something akin to that. There's some energy that what you give forth, you're going to receive in equal measure, or ×3 or ×10, whatever it might be. For us in Dunisha, what's beautiful about it is that it ties into the Living Peace teachings, because we always want to create a foundation of inner peace. And from that foundation of inner peace, when you start directing your consciousness in different directions from a place of peace, you're going to notice you're going to gain a lot more momentum with said manifestations. And what Abraham Hicks or Esther Hicks, who channels the being, or she wouldn't say channels, but the being of Abraham talks through her, they would say that you're never not manifesting. You're always being a active, I don't know if this is my words or her words, but you're always being an active participant in the creation of your reality. So every person you interact with, every experience you have, there's some type of energy transfer going on. And it's really fascinating, because if you've ever woken up on the non-great side of the bed and you go into your day, maybe you go into town, you may notice that your mind naturally drifts towards complaints, your mind naturally drifts towards noticing things that are not going well. But if you find yourself in a great mood and then you go into town, it's interesting is that those little things don't even show up on your radar. Has anyone ever felt that way before? I know when I'm exhausted, all I see is what's the paint chipping off the walls. But when I'm in a great mood, I don't even notice that. And so it's akin to almost like you're changing the dial on the radio and you're tuning into a frequency to what you're then observing. I've always found it fascinating is it's almost like kids do this in school when you're constantly surrounded by a lot of people, to where you see your friends, but then everyone else in the room, you don't even remember that they were there. Isn't that interesting? Maybe not for individuals who are in small classrooms, but if you're in a classroom of 30 people and then the next class you're in another group of 30 different kids and then the next class of different 30 kids, you're not tuning into every single person's frequency. You're only tuning into a few that are in vibrational resonance with you, whether it's negative or positive. Because if someone holds your negative attention, they're consuming your attention, aren't they? Same way as if someone's holding your positive attention. So it's not a matter of right, wrong, good, bad, but there definitely is the negative separating force and the positive unifying force. And I always tell folks, another quote that's common, I can't remember who originally coined it, but the saying that we're the average of the 5 people we surround ourselves most with. We're the average of the 5 people we surround ourselves most with. And I would actually change that to, you are the average of the 5 people or situations or energies that you give your attention to the most. So it could literally be the news. It could be someone that you watch every single day, even though they're not physically in your life, because you're giving them your attention, it's still one of your 5. Or it could be something from the past that has caused great harm to you, that you're just still seething over with anger or resentment, or maybe it could be guilt and shame. And you're just constantly recalling that situation or that person in your mind, even if you haven't seen them in 10 years. That is one of your core 5. So think of it this way. We are the average vibration, the average energy of the 5 things, people, or situations that we give our mental energy to on a daily basis, on a weekly basis. Isn't that interesting to think? And has anyone ever felt that or noticed that before, that when you've shifted your perception, you felt better or worse about something? I mean, I see it constantly. I'm pointing to my little coaching nook over there. Working with people, especially first-timers or first 1 or 2 sessions, and they come in with this really heavy thing that they've been chewing on for years. And the way that our coaching works is we really change stories around. We get into the bread and butter of the subconscious mind, and we offer them a new perspective that is also true. One that comes from more their own alignment versus the victimhood of the ego. And what's interesting is in just that short 1 or 2 sessions, the individual walks out with a fresh perspective, and they actually have relief on their body, in their mind, that they may not have had for the past year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years. And the only thing that their outside circumstances had not changed. The only thing that changed was their mind, their perception, their digestion of life experience. Does that make sense? And so think about it. When we're trapped in certain belief systems, whether positive or negative, they absolutely do color what we see out when we're walking through life. They color our relationships, they color our experiences, and then they influence our reactions and our responses to life. And put all that together, you're creating reality. You're creating experienced reality by being an active participant in the creation of your reality. Most often we are unconscious participants in the creation of reality, when with these teachings we're learning to become active participants in the co-creation of our reality, because you can't interact with someone without having some influence occurring. Many of us, when we interact with people, we might be raised up by them or we might be lowered by them. In Dunish and Living Peace, we do our best to always be even-keeled. We do our best to help bring peace and raise people up, not so much to trying to give them a false sense of exuberation, but rather teaching them that peace is possible no matter the circumstance. Before these teachings, holy shit, life was a yo-yo. Whoever you interact with, some days are great days, other days are rough days, and it's just a constant yo-yo effect. And I personally got exhausted by that. And that's why I dove so deeply into Zen, Law of Attraction teachings, and then Dunisha and Living Peace were kind of the manifestation of all of that. So let's go ahead and jump into the first quote of the day, which you have down on your piece of paper. So this is by Esther Hicks, aka Abraham. The only way to consciously deactivate a thought is to activate another. In other words, the only way to deliberately withdraw your attention from one thought is to give your attention to another. What's beautiful is this kind of harkens to the teachings I've been starting to bring out on the teaching of transmutation. What that means is that transmutation is you're taking one thing, one substance, and transforming it into another substance. And we've learned with like physics and all that fun stuff, jazz. Science is not my big thing, so excuse me if I get words wrong, words inaccurate here, but energy can never be created or destroyed, right? So something cannot become nothing, and nothing cannot become something, right? You're always changing form. Even when the human body, even when someone passes away and their body eventually decomposes and you never see that body again, that energy that made up that person still exists somewhere in the universe. Does that make sense? And so, isn't it interesting to think that we're breathing the same air that the dinosaurs breathed, right? Or that Jesus breathed, or that Buddha breathed. Again, it's not exactly the same, but there's always that recycling of energy. Same thing when you see a cloud and eventually it dissolves and disappears. The cloud, even though you don't see it anymore, it still exists in some fashion. And so the same applies, that this is where I'm tying over that teaching. The same applies to how we handle consciousness, in a sense that you can't just stop your mind. You can't stop thinking a negative thought and not have it transmute into something else. Does that make sense? When you had a rough experience, you still have to digest that experience in some way. You can't just push it down. Who's ever pushed it down and just pretended like it didn't happen or didn't exist? And then it comes out in your nightmares. It resurfaces in the subconscious mind, sometimes through dreams, sometimes through nightmares, but often through our own behavior. Often we'll get triggered by something and then it finds its way out. And so we always want to take the energy of our thoughts and our mind and transmute it into something else, not just trying to put a cork on it and saying that's done. Does that make sense? So when we're in grief, we find a way to transmute that energy into acceptance, forgiveness, or gratitude. When we're in anger, we learn to transmute that energy into patience and acceptance. When we're in, it could literally be anything. It could be frustration, grief, anger, sadness, guilt, self-acceptance, right? Shame. Acceptance is always in all of them, pretty much. Because I find that resistance and acceptance are two sides of the same coin. When we're twisted up and tight in our mind and our body, we're in a resistance state. And then when we open ourselves up, we're going into an accepting state. Does that make sense? So there's always this transmutation, this transformation that is occurring. And I think a lot of times we get goofed up with these teachings and they don't really work in our favor, or they don't work out even though we're trying really hard. It's because we're not recognizing that this negative energy that we're feeling cannot just disappear. There has to be a transformation of it, and to turn it into some fertilizer that will then lead into some other energy. Does that make sense? Andrew sees me go through that all the time. It doesn't happen too much anymore, but there's times I still get a little bit funky monkey, and I always just sit my ass down and I find a way, I find a thought pattern that will lead me out of this negative emotion into a unifying, positive, inspiring, motivating thought form that will then allow me to transmute this experience. Maybe a lot of times it's where I put my foot in my mouth and I feel embarrassed, right? Maybe accidentally hurt someone's feelings. I'm just like, the last thing I ever want to do is make people feel awful. And sometimes you just can't help it. People are interacting with each other and we brush up. And so I always carry that weight on my shoulders anytime someone has a judgment with me. And so I find a pathway in my mind to transmute that guilt, that shame, that judgment, whatever it might be, into a motivating force for, I'm very using dualistic terminology, but positive transformation, positive influence, positive change. Does that make sense? The last time I ever yelled at, many of you heard this story, but the last time I ever raised my voice at anyone, I'm just like, never again. But it wasn't so much of denying that experience happened. I had to accept that experience happened, and then I turned that into fertilizer, utilized it to then propel me into the future to this day of never raising my voice in anger towards someone since that moment. Does that make sense? But what do we often do instead? We blame the other person, or we just stifle it, rather than transmute it. So write that word down, transmute. And so a bullet point I'm going to have you write down too. This is the main, I already said it, but bread and butter. So we're going to write down bullet point thought with an arrow pointing to seed manifestation. And then another one with belief with an arrow pointed to sprouted manifestation. Thought pointed to seed manifestation, belief pointed to sprouted manifestation. Energy is always being transmitted constantly in our life. It never stops as long as we're alive. And then when we pass over, it changes form into something else. But consciousness is also energy. And so every thought is a seed, while belief systems that we have, beliefs. So when you think a thought long enough, it eventually turns into a belief, whether positive or negative or neutral about ourselves. Such as, I'm a great public speaker, or I'm shitty and horrible at speaking and I never want to speak in front of anyone ever again, right? Changes our way we show up in life, doesn't it? High self-esteem, low self-esteem, self-acceptance, not self-judgment. So belief systems are the sprouted form of the thought seeds that occur. And that's why it's so important to be very mindful of the thoughts that you allow to run amok in your mind throughout the day, because eventually they do turn into belief systems, which I talk about in Living Peace. And you don't have to write this down, but you're welcome to. But thoughts and words are magic, laying the blueprint of our reality. Thoughts and words are magic, laying the blueprint of our reality. Thoughts and words are magic, laying the blueprint of our reality. Which leads me, I'm going to actually jump down to the third quote at the bottom by Esther Hicks. It is our promise to you that if you write things you appreciate in others, in your life, and in yourself, you will have such a dramatic change in 30 days. If you continue to write these for 6 months, the change will be so powerful, so strong, that others who know you will not recognize the old you. So in other words, she's saying, if you write just appreciations, gratitudes about other people, yourself, and life situations for 30 days, every single day, you're going to notice a huge life shift for yourself. If you continue this practice for 6 months, you will change. Your energy will change so much. The old people, your old friends, will not even recognize the new you, because you will be so tapped in, tuned in, turned on with your mind-body synchronicity of appreciation and gratitude. Complaining is not even in your mindset anymore, because you've reprogrammed your mind to be so focused on seeing the beauty in life. You can't help but have a new vibrancy manifest. And I've been through this transformation. People often, compliment, they enjoy being around me. I'm sometimes monotone, but I'm peaceful monotone, unless I'm teaching or doing line dancing and stuff. But I get compliments for that. And some of my students who've been with me for years get compliments as well. That's a huge change from the little shit show I was as a teenager or preteen when I was caught in my depression. And when I was trapped in my depression for 6 years, literally every thought I thunk was negative. Every thought, even my parents, they say, look at the beautiful sunshine, like, let's go do this thing. I would just push against anything positive, because for whatever reason, as a young child, I don't know the manifestation of it, but I definitely struggled with being an outcast for a long time. So I think after a while, it just chipped away at my consciousness, at my belief systems. And so there was a short spell in my life where I thought happiness was a lie. That changes one's reality, doesn't it? And so when you think it's not possible, you're going to respond to life in that way, or react to life situations in that way. But then after learning these teachings, starting to study Zen, and recognize that words and thoughts have power, and that by changing belief systems, by thinking new thoughts, changing the inner dialogue of my mind, no matter how difficult it was, my body itself started to transform. everything around me started to change and transform, not only in how I responded to life, but also in the opportunities that were starting to come my way, because I was dialing into a new frequency. I was, maybe before I was just listening to heavy rock. Now I'm listening to country, or now I'm listening to hip hop. Now I'm listening to smooth jazz. It doesn't matter what it is, but whatever you're dialed in on, that's the music that you're going to hear. That's the life experiences that you're going to hear. And the way to change the dial is to change the thought stream, consciously change the thought stream that's occurring in your life. Well, how do we do that, Alaric? Abraham Hicks talks a lot about this, but she doesn't necessarily teach the strong hows beneath it. She teaches you more of why it's important to do it and the result of if you do it. Well, I find that Zen teachings, Buddhist teachings, are fantastic at teaching us how to master the brain, how to master the mind, master our impulses, master our emotions, which again turned into living peace. Isn't that cool? So let's take a breath. So going to this second, the middle quote by Esther Hicks. The rule of thumb is you never take action when there is negative emotion within you because it will always be counterproductive. Always talk to yourself until you feel better and then follow the inspired action that comes from the open valve. Let me repeat that. Never take action when there is a negative emotion within you because it will always be counterproductive. Always talk to yourself until you feel better and then follow the inspired action that comes from the open valve. That open valve is another way of saying alignment. When you're in that receptive openness. Who's ever gotten into a row with someone? Which that's, I guess, an English-British way of saying conflict. I was watching a documentary. Who's ever gotten into a row with someone before? And then you wanted to react in that moment. Maybe you did, maybe you didn't. It was rough though, right? But maybe you let it sit for a day or two. And then you notice you naturally drift back into feeling a little bit better sometimes. That's happened to me before. When you just give a little bit of space, your body naturally, when you stop thinking about the issue, your body naturally finds its way back into a bit of alignment. And then you can go back and respond to the situation. But in the heat of it, when the ego is just recently triggered and it's running the show, does it normally work out in your favor when you react right then and there? Normally not. Maybe you do shut the shit down, but what you ended up doing, anytime we shut someone down, you cut them in the process. And then now you're going to have to deal with that wound that later festers. And so there's going to be another issue later on that you're going to have to address because you yelled at them and then now they feel that resentment, or you said a harsh word or a judgment, or you were passive aggressive. It doesn't matter what it is, but anytime when we say anger and yelling and harsh words get results and they motivate people to do shit, or fear of punishment, what that's actually doing is you're setting up a belief system of separation and negative momentum, negative emotion that you're going to have to deal with later on. So it's never worth it in that moment to just try and get things done speedy. Does that make sense? It's always best to slow down, take time to explain things, and then respond when you return to that alignment. So the second, I'm going to have you right over here in the middle part. I'm going to have you write down impulse with an arrow. Impulse with an arrow to undirected manifestation. Impulse, arrow, undirected manifestation. And then the next bullet point is going to be response with an arrow, intentional manifestation. Intentional manifestation. So, and star this, like do multiple stars. This is one of the big points I'm inviting you all to take away from today. Every time you act on impulse, you're reinforcing an unintentional manifestation. And every time you choose to respond, you're taking back that power and you're intentionally choosing a manifestation. Impulses reinforce what already is or lead to unintentional manifestations, or impulses and reactions, another way of saying that would be when we're reacting, while responding contemplating and then responding is leading to, it's almost like you're laying the foundation of intentional manifestation. That is precisely how this place came into existence, this beautiful new lodge for us. I've been doing this for 10 freaking years, working on this goal. And every little choice I made led one step, one brick at a time to get to this place. Never rushing it and never giving up on it, but one brick at a time. A lot of people, we've been watching a lot of interviews with like celebrities or creatives that have done incredible things. And what's fascinating is that they become overnight sensations. It appears that way. But if you actually look at their stories, they might have been working on it for 10, 20, 30 years, one brick at a time. And I was watching Mark Hamill, Luke Skywalker. He is hilarious. He also does the voice of the Joker, and he does a lot of voice acting, and he's really talented. But he was saying it's fascinating. He went to college with someone, or acting school with someone, he's like just as talented as Meryl Streep. I got her name correct, right? Okay. But she didn't have the perseverance in the same way that Meryl Streep did. So he was saying more of the actors that make it are not always necessarily the best, but they're the ones who have the most perseverance. And that's what really separates individuals who end up giving up on things, and they have big dreams, but they never actually reach the finale of it, and the individuals that they just keep putting one foot in front of the other. And so I'm inviting you to make sure that you're responding to life. And all these individuals that I study and I research with the books, and it's really fascinating. Almost all of them have a common denominator of being very intentional with their words, being very intentional with what they wear, being very intentional with the things that they say yes to and the things that they say no to. And so again, it's brick by brick. It's not leaving things up to luck. It's choosing consistently, consciously, one step at a time. Whereas many of us, we kind of just drift from day to day. I've definitely been a drifter before. I always have this main thing I'm working on, but there's been times where sometimes I'll dip into a little bit of depressive thoughts, and then I find myself back out, and then I get distracted with projects going on around me. I say yes to too many things at once, and then I get distracted by that, and and then the main goal gets on the back burner. Who's ever felt that way before? So again, are we impulsively reacting to life? Because there's always going to be something else to piss you off or something to distract you. Or are we responding consciously and making sure that we're staying true to in this instance, the teachings that remind us of our alignment? And I just wrote, you don't have to write this down, it's a bit long, but I just love this. I wrote this last night or 2 nights ago. Pay attention to your impulses to see what your future will be. Pay attention to your impulses to see what your future will be. Because if you're a very impulsive creature and you're just reacting to every little thing that's coming your way, most likely that's what it's gonna be in a month, 6 months, a year. It's just gonna be repeating the same shit different day, because you're not taking that dial and tuning that frequency to change your life course. Does that make sense? So it's very easy to see where our footsteps are leading. All you have to do is look down and see what direction they're pointed in. If they're pointed that direction, that's where you're walking. But if you're consciously choosing to point them in a different direction, they're going to be walking in that direction. And hopefully they're not pointing backwards, because you can't go there. Just turns into stagnancy. And so finally, at the very bottom, bullet point, emotion, arrow, waters manifestations. Emotion, arrow, waters manifestations. And then the last bullet point will be unattachment. Unattachment, arrow, healthy manifestation. Unattachment, arrow, healthy manifestation. So any emotions that we have, whether you deem them negative or positive, they're watering. They're watering that little sprout. They're watering that sprout manifestation. But what's most important is to remain unattached from the goals and of the relation, everything. Just be unattached from everything, not detached, unattached. Because what happens when you get too attached? Anyone want to share? What happens when you're super attached to something?
There's judgment.
There's judgment. Thank you. When you're super attached to someone, something, even if it's someone that you love, even if it's your biggest dream, generally you're going to be a bit more resistant to things. You're going to be a bit more controlling. You're going to take your claws, your fingers, and squeeze it and try to... It's kind of like you become a smother mother. I'll just say that. Who's ever felt that or been that? I've been that, and I'm technically not a mother. But you end up acting more from a place of fear when you're super attached to something. And fear does lead to judgment. You might be fear of losing someone or something, or you might be feeling more insecurity around it. But when you just naturally focus on your alignment, your own well-being, and you pay attention to your responses, you pay attention to your thoughts and your belief systems, and you pay attention to your emotions, that's all you have to do. You're going to notice that opportunities are naturally going to come. You're going to notice that little sprout's going to naturally grow. Because again, think about it this way. Every single year, the snow melts, and the grass comes back, the greenery comes back, and grows by itself without our intervention. So you don't have to make this sprout. It's not your responsibility to force it to grow. You're an active participant with it. All these little seeds that you planted, you're an active participant with it, but you're not the one growing it by itself. Does that make sense? Abraham Hicks would say, leave that to source energy. But you still have to show up. You have to make sure that you're watering it. You have to make sure you're actually planting those seeds. Make sure that you're allowing the seed to grow with the correct responses versus always reacting. Does that make sense? So again, unattachment is huge. Because there's been times working on this stream, and even now, because we're still at the early stages, I can fully get into fear mode. I can just look around right now and see 20 things that need to be done. And I can start hyperventilating because it's a lot of work. Whew. Oh, ceiling, carpet. This carpet's from like the 70s, man.
Hey, what's wrong with
Like, what is this hole over here in the wall? I don't know, you know? So it's like, but again, it's gonna get done. I'm gonna keep showing up to the party, but I don't have to freak out about it. I'm gonna respond to it. I'm going to remain healthfully unattached, not detached. Detached is not caring. Attached is like, oh, too much. You're going to piss people off. But allowing there to be some spaciousness. Does that make sense? So let's breathe that in. So I'll go ahead and conclude with this. Because again, 7 days work on not complaining. Hopefully this kind of gave you an outline of why complaining fucks up your vibration. It messes up everything that you're trying to create, because every time you voice a complaint, you just added a seed in the other pile of the things that you don't want, right? Or maybe every time you dwell, maybe you're not complaining out loud with your words, but you're dwelling. Every time you're dwelling, it's like you're taking this huge watering can of Miracle Grow and doing this on all the shit you don't want. And so every time you're in, you share a word of gratitude or appreciation with someone, you plant the beautiful seed. And every time you journal, you focus on your teachings, you go into the meditation, you get into mind-body harmony, you're taking that same watering can and watering this over here. I definitely believe that one of the biggest, this was even after I was a teenager and I had Earth Spirit Center for Healing, but I was still struggling. What finally got me over this hump that I was struggling with was I made a vow to I'm done complaining about things. And, I'm not perfect, but I remember there was a while I just kept going to my parents' house every time once a week, twice a week. I'm just unload on them. And then I noticed it was making them upset. I was noticing that it was influencing them negatively. And here I'm like preaching peace, and I wanted to be this source of positive vibration, but then I unload on them. Yeah, I'm holding space for all these other people that are unloading on me, but then I go home and I unload on them. And so I had to find a new way to transmute it, because all that was happening was it was being given to me by my clients and students, and then I was giving it to my parents, right? And now what I do is I take it. I don't even take it for my clients or students anymore. That's their shit. I hold space. No offense for those of you who work with me. But I hold space and I teach you how to transmute it. It's not my responsibility to do it, right? But back when I was young, I'm just like, give it all, you know. I thought that was the best way to go about it. It's a little too zealous. But now I let everyone have their own stuff. If it's not my ship, I don't get on it. Write that down. Not my ship, don't get on it. All of you who have friends and family, stop jumping on their ship. That's their ship, right? But now, anytime I notice negative energy or vibration or just feeling, it's not even negative. Negative is not bad or wrong. It just means a separating force between my mind and body. Anytime I feel that, say, okay, where has my attention been going today? And where could it be going? And where will I have it go now that I'm aware that I've been a bit funky? And so I shift that thought process. And then here we are. So let's take a deep breath. Before I close out the video, any thoughts, questions, words? Or would you like to save them for when the video's off? Okay, so I'll go ahead and wrap us up. I want to thank all of y'all who watched up to this point joining us. Links are down below. Please definitely either comment or let me know through Messenger or some way if you enjoyed me using this video format versus my other one, because I know the other one had its own sound issues in video, so please let me know. Thank you as always for your generous donations. They really help us a lot. As you can see, we have this beautiful new place, but there's a lot of work ahead, so everything helps us expand more into a retreat center. Thank you and see you next week. Mwah.